بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Chapter 21. باب ما جاء أن الغلو في قبور الصالحين يصيرها أوثانا تعبد من دون الله, which means exaggeration in the graves of the righteous persons tends them to become idols worshipped besides Allah. This is the title. Al-Ghulu, exaggeration, extremism with regarding to the graves of the righteous people tends them to become idols worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is after chapter 20, which when the matter was made clear, the condemnation of the one who worships Allah at the grave of a righteous man, and how then does this amount to worship of the man? The people that would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not worshipping the dead people, but worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But by the graves of the righteous people, this is something that is condemned, something that is not permissible. So then the next chapter is in sequence, that those who are in extremism, exaggeration, with regarding to the graves of the righteous people, it tends to make these righteous people, after generations, they would be idols worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, روى مالك في الموطأ أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال اللهم لا تجعل قبري وثنا يعبد اشتد غضب الله على قوم اتخذوا قبور أنبيائهم مساجد, which means, O Allah, never turn my grave into an idol to be worshipped. Allah's wrath intensifies on the people who turn their prophets' graves into masajid, into places of worship. So this is a clear hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, that he had the fear that his ummah would fall into what the nations before fell in, and that is to worship their prophets besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And worshipping the prophets meaning that they would make a ibadah, even one ibadah, one act of worship to the Prophet and not to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like the dua, like the slaughtering, like the vow, like whatever ibadah that would be. So how did that happen? Is the exaggeration, is the extremism that leads them to such a disaster, which is the shirk, worshipping other besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is basically the sunnah of Allah on earth, that people, most of the human beings, they are forgetful about the end results of their actions, right? So they might do something, they don't see where this is leading them to. So that's why it's enough for them to be submissive to the orders of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They don't need to look ahead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to do something, forbade them from do something, then this is enough for them, even if they would say, well, our case is different, and no, this is not permissible. Like many people would say, statues were forbidden at a time when people were closer to matters of kufr. Now it's different, right? There's no difference. If it's haram, then it's haram. So here the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ states clearly this fact and saying, اشتد غضب الله, that Allah's wrath intensifies on people that they made the graves of their prophets masajid, places of worship, places where they pray in, places of worship that has been built, as is mentioned in the previous hadith. What we benefit from this hadith? We benefit that al-ghulu meaning exaggeration or extremism with regarding to the prophets' graves would make it idols, worship besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet ﷺ made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to make his grave as a wathan meaning an idol, to be worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, that from the exaggeration that the Prophet ﷺ forbade here clearly in the hadith, that when people would take the graves as a place of worship, and this is something that is widespread in the Muslim Ummah, they did not listen to the order of the Prophet ﷺ. They did the total opposite of it. And this is where the extremism, where the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from this, and that leads to shirk. And you go in any of these places where there is a grave being on top of it, a masjid, you would find the shirk. You would find people calling this place besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as exactly as the Prophet ﷺ said, which is in itself a miracle from the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, that this matter never failed. Also, as the Shaykh mentions in the benefits, اشتد غضب الله, the wrath of Allah, the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So believing in this attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that fits the power and the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry with those who do such a thing. يقول ولابن جرير بسنده عن سفيان عن منصور عن مجاهد أفرأيتم اللات والعزى قال كان يلت لهم السويك فمات فعكفوا على قبره. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. يقول وكذا قال أبو الجوزاء عن ابن عباس كان يلت السويق للحاج. So he mentioned here another narration from Ibn Jarir Imam al-Tabari, the one with the tafsir, and he mentioned the chain of narration that Mujahid, he said, with regarding to the tafsir of the verse, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى, which means have you then considered Al-Lat and Al-Uzza. He said, كَانَ يَلُتُّ لَهُمُ السُّوَيْقِ. The Lat, what is the Lat and what is the Uzza that is mentioned in the verse? The Lat, these were idols for the people of Quraysh. They used to worship it besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says the Lat used to serve the pilgrims by preparing a suwaiq, fine flour of barley or wheat mixed with water and ghee for them. After his death, the people began to stay and confine at his grave for the purpose of reward. They just stayed by his grave, and then after that it became a place of worship besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They did not worship it immediately besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that led them to such a thing. He says the same was reported by Abdul-Wahhab from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he reported لعن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم زائرات القبور والمتخذين عليها المساجد والسرج, which means Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam cursed the women who visit the graves. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam also cursed those who set up mosques, masajid, and lights over graves, those who have lights and candles or whatever there is over the graves. This hadith has been confirmed by Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and An-Nasa'i. So this hadith is also clearly, as Ibn Abbas he said, that the Prophet ﷺ cursed the women, those who visit their graves, and those who would take on the graves masajid, build on the graves masajid, and those who would have candles or lights or whatever there is by the graves, a way of extremism that would lead people to the worship besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The lights and all these things are exaggeration, extremism that would lead the person. This is the human nature. If he would go transgress beside the limits or outside the limits, not following the way of the Prophet ﷺ, the punishment on such a person that is innovating in the deen of Allah, that it would lead the people to shirk wal-'iyadhu billah. These things definitely lead to people's destruction with the shirk and so on. So the curse means that they are kicked out of the mercy of Allah as a result of this major sin that leads people to the worst sin, and that is to associate partners with Allah. We learn from this that it's not permissible to exaggerate when it comes to the graves, that we don't take it as places of worship, because the places of worship should be free from graves and so on. Graves are not places of worship. Also, it shows that it's not permissible to light the graveyard, right? Because this can lead to make it a place of worship. You keep it dark, you keep it look like it's not a very pleasant place, right? You don't want people to feel comfortable there, so that they can start worshipping the graves besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's something that should remind people of the hereafter. And we said before that, why do we visit the graves? Because the Prophet ﷺ ordered us for two reasons. One reason is that it reminds us of the hereafter, so it's for our own benefit. The second reason why we would visit the graves, to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the benefit of the people, those who are dead. Not that we seek blessings from them. No, we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives them, and so on and so forth. So these are the two reasons why a person would visit a grave. Other than that, it's not permissible to take it as a place of worship, or to think that the worship there is more rewardable than other places, and all of these types of things. Also, the extremism in regarding to the graves, if there is no shirk being involved, still it's something that is haram, it's a major sin. Even if the person did not do any acts of shirk, it is haram. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ forbade us of such a thing. Why it is not permissible for us to pray there? Because of the fear that shirk will be committed. Not because that it's impure as some people thought, and they twist the meanings here. Although in many ahadith it would mention the maqbara with the places of like the hammam, the toilets and things like this. But the main thing is because out of the fear of shirk, because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned here in the hadith clearly that he made it the forbidding building masajid on it and to make it light, and he cursed both ways and both people, those who would do such a thing. And when you make the graves light, right, it has nothing to do with najasa, it has nothing to do with impurity. So as a result of that, it is forbidden to pray in the graveyard because of the fear of the shirk, which is definitely the worst sin that can ever be committed. So this is chapter 21. Briefly, and the matter is very clear. Again, we need to repeat this over and over again. We only heard hadith, verse, hadith, right? You heard the name of Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, and so on. This is how we take our deen, and this is how the matter should be very clear. Not that things that get discovered hundreds of years after the Prophet ﷺ, like the Christians did with Isa ﷺ and the Jews did with Musa ﷺ. No, we go back to the source. We go back to the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the early generations of Islam. This is the deen, not the deen that get invented. Whereas at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, there were masajid with graves and people build the masajid on top of the graves and all of these things. It was never the practice of the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba. This came later when the Fatimis and the like of them, they start spreading